Episode 1, Ronus. Three unlikely friends gathered for a drink and a bowl of halfling paste at the Muddy Brisket Tavern, where they had come to know they could get a reliable meal, and where the tiefling in their party had been residing for some time. It wasn't really an inn, but Ronus the devilish paladin had convinced Ogletop, the halfling owner, to let him stay in their attic for next to nothing. And so here he has stayed for the last 20 span. He couldn't believe it had been more than 200 days since they went their separate ways. He had seen Dreadfire, the blue dragonborn, around the city from time to time, as he too was a paladin mercenary and sword-fighting instructor to pass the time in this ancient city. Nulvagar was different from the other cities on the west of the continent. Though it obliged the Swords of Unity, it still held to its tradition of monarchs, and thus many of the city folk who dreamed of nobility could be found wishing for a spot on the Crown's Guard. And so there was work for Dread and for Ronus, though they did not share a school. Still, with their economic security, they lacked the fulfillment they needed. Ronus still had never shared the truth about his life to Dreadfire, but, then again, he didn't know the truth about it himself. He itched for it. He burned to remember. So when Tagrin the elf mage returned from his trip to Windheim, where he spent the spoils of their last adventures on scrolls and study, Ronus and Dreadfire were happy to meet him for a drink and a meal. Though they sat like friends reminiscing and enjoying the company, there was an unspoken desire that lingered in the air. Ronus could feel it. He had wanted to say it. Can we begin again? Is there more greatness for us? But he did not speak. No one did. They all were quiet, each staring into the half-empty bowls of their halfling paste. However, while Ronus was silent because he could not find his voice to speak, he realized that Dreadfire was silent for a different reason. Dreadfire's face held the familiar expression of heightened focus, and from there Ronus could look down to see that Dreadfire clutched at the pommel of his longsword. Something was coming. The fragments of splintering wood seemed to reach them before the sound of impact, as a small halfling bulldozed through the swinging saloon doors with such force that they broke in spite of their willingness to open. The halfling flew through the air as it was in a leap from the porch outside, through the air and onto the back of Dreadfire. Though Dreadfire was prepared for something, he could not have prepared for this. The halfling violently pounded at him, denting into parts of his armor and chipping scales off his arms where iron did not cover him. Ronus and Tagrin leaped out of their chairs, sending the furniture flying out from the table that just moments ago hosted a pleasant lunch of friends. When Dreadfire was finally able to yank the creature off of him, Ronus was quick to draw his sword and shield to strike. In a combo of attacks, Ronus slashed the halfling twice and bashed him with his shield, sending the creature nearly back through the doors. But the creature was still very much alive. Its gashes teemed with shadowy strands that seemed to sew its wounds back together. And with its strength it bashed once at the shield, sending a vibration through to Ronus's shoulder, leaving him open for a second fist. Tagrin still had a table between him and the halfling, so he cast 3 magical darts that spread quickly from his staff and joined at the center of the halfling's mass, further forcing the creature back, causing it to stagger into the daylight that lit the porch behind. In the clarity of light, they could all see now. They recognized the halfling, or what was once a halfling, and they knew for certain now that the creature should die. Dreadfire continued to slash at it, stepping out into the porch himself. But while his radiant slashes struck true, the beast seemed not to wince in pain. In fact, it only continued to fight. With one of its fists, it cracked the inner knee of Dreadfire, deforming the iron plate that shaped it, causing the dragonborn to fall underneath his own weight. The creature then mounted the paladin and began repeatedly slamming at him. Ronus couldn't believe what he saw. Dreadfire's armor and scales seemed to fall apart like stone to a pickaxe under the unnatural strength of this tiny creature. Ronus stabbed at it, piercing it once more, causing it to strike him again. Tagrin stepped into the tap room to better orient himself and spoke, Enough! In the palm of his hand, a tiny ball of bat guano and sulfur ignited into a small flame that he threw through the doorway. When it landed on the back of the halfling, it expanded into a great ball of flame that erupted in all directions, making it impossible to see for a moment. He had learned to control his flames to protect his allies, but his focus could only be split so many ways. When the explosion ran its course, the flames had not touched Ronus or Dread, but they had ignited the wooden porch and doors. And worst of all, the halfling stood to face Tagrin. At this point, patrons of the Muddy Brisket cowered behind the bar within, but pedestrians from the street had gathered to satisfy their curiosities. The halfling screeched a supernatural song of pain, and with a swiftness seen before, leaped off the porch towards one of the onlookers. With a simple clapping of his hands, he flattened the head of a young woman who stood by, killing her instantly. He looked around the crowd to find another victim, but as they ran in fear, Ronus had caught up to him. Ronus stabbed the creature in the back, stunning it, reducing it to its knees. The black, shadowy webs that held closed its wounds before began to spin around the blade as its head creaked around slowly to look at the tiefling. This shocked him, though he was not afraid. In fact, Ronus found himself looking past the creature that's head slowly turned beyond the skeletal allowance of its body and towards the man in the crowd that did not run. The man in a peasant's robes. The hooded man approached, raising his hand with his palm facing the creature. Izakai Ramura. And a bolt of light can be the only description. A bolt of light shot out from his hand into the back of the creature's head, searing it until the body that moved unnaturally could move no more. Ronus pulled his blade from the body, and with that the kneeling husk could no longer balance upright, and it crashed onto the ground. Still holding a stance worthy of combat, Ronus spoke his thoughts. Who the hell are you?